I'm Will from Buskey Cider, and also class of Hampden-Sydney 2012, and it's really cool to get to do it with you guys. Normally, we get to have groups of Hampden-Sydney guys in here, and we're not great at social distancing. Show a lot of camaraderie, so it's a little weird to do this way, but the world's kind of a crazy place right now. So thank you for the outpouring of support, and thank you for taking some time out of your evening to hear about what I do and my family and my business, and some little things we got in the community. One of the cool things that led up to this was getting an email. It was a bit of a different giving email that said the school was going to be putting together a fund to take care of Hampden-Sydney guys who were at this time adversely affected by COVID-19. While it's affecting virtually everyone in the entire world, I think it's really a core tenet of brotherhood to take care of those who are struggling with that strange tradition. Something so anticipated. So cheers to Hampden-Sydney and taking care of our Super Bowl. So that's why we're here today. So cheers. The little bit of backstory for how I ended up here and where I am and ended up at Hampden-Sydney and all. So I grew up in Franklin, Virginia, which is in Tidewater. And my wife and I both grew up there. Our dads worked at the same paper mill. And when the mill got bought out and shut down, I ended up getting moved to Memphis. She ended up in Cincinnati and ultimately in Missouri and Spain. So when I finished up high school in Memphis, I really wanted to come back to Virginia and got a really unique letter with photography, which is how a lot of our stories started. I think we all get that reference. But basically, got a really unique letter. At the time, I was laid up with an injury, and my dad was like, hey, this sounds really cool. You should drive out and getting to take a 13-hour road trip with your dad and go visit a school in Virginia. So we headed out and just immediately fell in love with the campus. And having studied Latin for a long time, the Latin motto on the door about coming through a boy and leaving a man really spoke to me. And just a lot of the values of Hampden-Sydney and beautiful campus and all. We've all had this experience. But also one of the things that I felt very strongly from my first guest lesson from Dr. Correll all the way through joining and going through campus was that really it was a place that an entrepreneur could start to develop all the different skills. And so I'm incredibly grateful for my time at Hampden-Sydney, for Hampden-Sydney sponsoring me going to Start Peninsula, a small little startup competition that was a big part of my start, for the Dean of Students giving me an exemption so I can make alcohol in the Chi-Fi house, which ultimately is where all of this started. The tanks were a little less impressive, but there was a lot of enthusiasm. So I did actually start making the cider on campus in the Chi-Fi house, and we made some pretty cool stuff and some stuff that no one ever made before, and won that Start Peninsula competition, and ultimately raised capital, settled on Richmond. We have this facility that we're going to walk around today, and it's been quite a journey at this point. Opened 4 years ago. It's obviously 2 years after I graduated. It's been a little quicker, but entrepreneurship's all about the journey and all about surviving some hardships and coming stronger. And that started off early for me, but also Hampden-Sydney. In the marketing, it was a little confusing whether I was class of 12 or 13 because I fractured my skull my junior year and had to take a year off and then come back for another junior year. And ultimately, while Hampden-Sydney can be a bit of a rough, boys playing hard type place, I really got a ton of support to be able to come back and ultimately finish my experience. And then had a hard time opening this and ultimately got it open. And that is, it's a big part of the story of any entrepreneurial journey. One of the reasons that I thought this One Brotherhood Fund was so special was the idea that graduating college really had been very hard. Just my memory of concussion and coming back. It's very different. It's very different because everyone was dealing with the same thing simultaneously in this case. But I love the sense of brotherhood, the sense of ownership, the sense of family, and the idea that hopefully all of these students will be able to come back or at least land on their feet well as possible. So I think this is super cool. I love that you guys and gals bought cider to support, so some of the proceeds can go back to the school. I also appreciate you supporting us during what is a very strange time in our industry. So a little bit about when we give you this tour, it's going to look very different in here than anyone has ever seen it before because it's been closed to the public for a little while. Generally, our whole space, if you've been in here, is wide open. It's generally very beautiful, not very crowded. We have, just like the whole world, there's so many logistical breakdowns right now. Certain products that used to sell really well not, and other things selling much better, and public spaces that are empty, so they're now storage. So you're going to see And we're going to take you into some corners that we normally wouldn't show when it's so cluttered, but ultimately, like, there's clearly kegs stacked to the ceiling. And as my operations director said right before he left, like, it's going to look like a lot of cans, but there's days where we're worried about some of them being short, even though there's a lot, and there's other ones that we have too many. So it's a strange time. So I'm hoping to give you kind of a raw glimpse inside some of this. And some of y'all probably have read some of my blog posts and been following us on social media and know a little bit of my history. But one of the really strange choices you have to make when something's so unprecedented. Not that there's never been a pandemic or a worse one, but during none of our lifetimes something like this happened. I mean, the initial question is like, well, we're going to be forced to shut down. Do we do it early because we're being responsible and they're going to be good men, good citizens, or are we going to be titans of industry and say it's not our responsibility? Ultimately, we chose to shut down what we thought was very early. Ended up only being a few days early because we didn't understand how quickly things were going to accelerate. So we chose to shut down, but we also made a difficult decision up front that ended up being a very right decision, which was to keep our entire team on. Not only keep our team on, but to find ways to radically change our business overnight. So we went from a business that made virtually all of our money in the tasting room and keg sales to bars to a company that has no keg sales, bars, and no tasting. We still have can sales to grocery stores, which is great, they're low margin for us. They're more of like a marketing arm and small business, it's a lot of volume. So overnight, we're like, well, what do we do? Virginia was pretty forward thinking and allowing home delivery and allowing us to make that safe for our employees with contactless delivery and things like that. So my brother and my wife and sister-in-law and I basically pulled an all-nighter, taking our website down and relaunching it as an e-commerce site. Some of y'all have used it. Some of y'all have experienced the bugs with it. Some of y'all have been impressed with how well it worked. But ultimately, we did it overnight, and we're able to keep the whole team on. We've actually, all of our full-time members on. We were able to actually grow the team during this time, which is pretty cool. I mean, we're dealing with a lot of hardships and a lot of difficult things, but now that things are reopening, we have a fully functional team in place. We have the ability to continue to put out the best cider we've ever put out, and to be excellent, and to have good people around us. And during a time of isolation, and a time where the whole world is unknown, we're pretty close. It's really cool to have had that difficult decision pay off. And there definitely were some sacrifices. My wife and I chose to go without pay for a pretty extended amount of time to pay our team, and those are hard decisions, but decisions that I do think part of my reason why a decision like that was so obvious was my time in Hampden-Sydney. The idea we were instilled of being good men, good citizens, and Hampden-Sydney men are often leaders, but sometimes leadership is not glamorous, and this has not been a glamorous time at all. At the same time, I am confident that we are the best cidery that we have ever been. I also am confident that we can make a strong claim for being the best cidery period. And we wouldn't be without a team. We wouldn't be without alumni networks. We wouldn't be without family. So it's been a strange time, but that's kind of some of the backstory and like why we're here today and why we're in kind of an awesome setting, but also kind of an awkward setting. So the few things we're going to do today, I'm going to talk you through some of the ciders you might have gotten. One of the fun casualties of this time is that the big distribution batches don't move as fast because there's basically no distribution. We've got to make lots of fun little batches, which have been running out. So there was no way to do a cohesive, like, single tasting package where everyone would have the same ciders because that cider's running out in 3 days, 4 days. And to simplify that, and you may need to move the camera for this, but so historically, the little tanks like this, it's about 100 gallons, which is pretty small. The ones at Chi-Fi were a little bigger. They were not bigger, but about 100 gallons, which is 20 of the sixels, which is a 5-gallon keg roughly. We're not allowed to have on campus, but they might have arrived at some point. But 100 gallons. So normally this would be just for pints in the tasting room, and it's quite a few pints. Then when you look down the run, if you can see the largest tanks down here, and we'll see them better later on, but they're about 2,000 gallons. So that is roughly 20,000 12-ounce cans. So that is a substantially bigger tank. Because distribution is largely not happening right now, to oversimplify, lots of batches are moving at roughly the same speed. So obviously these batches are going to run out very quickly. So we're making lots of very fun, very creative batches. Some of you might have a habanero mango in front of you. You might have date nights that should run out today. You might have jalapeno lime that ran out a couple weeks ago. we had a lot of interesting ciders roll through to be gone, which is not really our business model. Our business model is to make enough cider and sustain it for at least weeks, let customers have that experience. So, so there's been some spikes with things like limited cool releases, and also some like major slowdown on big batches. And it's not that we're not selling more of our flagship, the RBA, than we've ever sold through the tasting room, but we don't have hundreds of bars across the state pouring, 20 of them a night. And so it's just a strange thing. And we'll walk through and we'll look at the inventory in the back and see some of the stuff that's built up. We'll see. I'll talk a little bit more about how things have changed, but we will talk about some of the flavors you're tasting and why using all Virginia apples and the yeast we use, having a really accomplished and passionate production team makes such a big difference, and also why the importance of like the great equipment we have and stuff. I'm not quite sure how we're doing on time. Start moving around. Okay. So let's go ahead and we'll walk through and I'll talk a little bit about how the equipment works. So initially, the thing you'll see with these tanks, the black lines that come down the back of the tank. Can we see this here? So these lines that come down here, this is from our glycol cooler. And then on this tank, you can see these dimples. Between these dimples here, when you're, cool. So between these dimples, there is space, and there's two pieces of metal. In between there is going to be coolant running through. So basically, it is antifreeze, but it's food safe. It's glycol. It's running through. So one of the most important parts of fermentation is controlling our temperature. So we take apple juice from Nelson County, and we have about 50 acres of orchards out there that do this. And we fill the tanks with apple juice, and then we put yeast in there, which is a living organism. Like most living organisms, when they heat, they create energy. They release energy, often in the form of heat. In this case, it's heat, fortunately not sound. So the yeast is eating sugar, and it's converting to alcohol, into CO2, and a variety of flavors. So our goal is to keep the tank cold at a certain temperature, so the yeast will move a little slower. So like most living organisms, yeast moves slower when it's cold. If it goes really fast, the cider would come up in temperature, kind of like when you put your hand into mulch, and it's really warm, build it, it's decomposing, it's not the sun. The decomposition, same thing. As it ferments, it creates heat. We don't want it to hit 110 degrees like it could, because we'll lose a lot of flavor, so we ferment cold. So that's the start of the process. Is we bring in the apple juice, and we start fermenting one of these tanks. We're going to talk through the filtration and carbonation down below. Transition may be a little awkward. Everyone involved, watch your step. So back here, you're walking back behind the tanks. And so behind the tanks, you can see all of the glycol lines and things like that dropping down. We're going to see a better version of these big tanks that will come around here. So you're back in the production, you're back in like the main production space that really no one ever sees. So we have our air compressors, we have our keg washer here. Obviously, we have lots of supplies. Now you're looking down the run from where we were, but this is one of the 2,000-gallon tanks here. And this is one of the 2,000-gallon tanks that I was saying, it's about 20,000 cans. We have 3 of these. We didn't have these when we first opened. We had multiple expansions. So that's a pretty large tank. I mean, there's only a handful of cideries in the region who would have a need for a large tank like this and turn it over regularly. And we've been lucky and blessed to have a lot of support and people that want our cider. So we do have some larger tanks, but one of the things that we do that's very inefficient is have this whole range of tanks going down. So the smaller the tank, basically the more creative and more niche the product we can do, the bigger risk we can take. And one of the things I take a lot of pride in is that we are the biggest cidery in the country that would do some of our projects and the smallest that could. And there's other cideries around the country that can make similar claims, and we think they're really cool. We like to hang out with them, but it is an unusual thing generally. Cider moves towards being mass-produced or only niche, and we balance professionalism and creativity in a way that I think is, honestly something I picked up through my education and picked up through my family, and it's a cool part of the cidery being able to do that. So we're going to walk down below here. So one of the weird things about this building is that it is a split-level building, which for a building that's only 7,000 square feet, that's a bit unusual. And the reason that it's split-level is that this is an old train loading dock building. So when you see the raised floor like this, people generally assume that a raised floor means that it's going to be at loading dock height, which is accurate, except that loading dock height is about here. This is a train loading dock building. So things would have been brought back here. This building was built during World War I. most likely. And basically, products have been loaded in here off of a truck or a lorry and brought up to this height and rolled to the alley and loaded onto a truck that would have gone down. And most of this neighborhood is based on train loading docks. So there's a lot of weird alleys. I haven't said this, but we're in Scott's Addition. It's one of the cooler craft beverage neighborhoods in the country. And one of the reasons is that this is a really peculiar building. This is not a great place for distribution. It's not a great place for really hardcore manufacturing. We have relatively short ceilings. We have a split level building, which you have to load up and down between them. But what we have is a beautiful building that's very solidly built in a densely urban area where people can come and experience the production. So you don't really want to hang out in your meat packaging facility. You don't really want to hang out in your dairy production facility. People do want to hang out where the beer or cider is being made. That's why Scott's Addition is so magical. It is an industrial building, but it is, it has customer finishes, it has materials that are popular. We'll talk a little bit more about the building in a second. Let me show you these tanks over here. This is kind of a cool feature. So down here, the tanks are a little bit more visible. So you'll see we have the range, we have our 60 barrel tanks. This is the same size as the 20,000 can tank that we were talking about a moment ago. 20,000 cans, so it's 2,000 gallons, 60 barrels, if you know your brewing terminology. And a brewing barrel is 31 gallons, which is 2 15.5 gallon half barrels, which is why those things are named that way. Normally, you won't get a free pint glass for answering the question, but it might be a little complicated. So we have 30, we have a 60, we have a 60, 30, and then that is an odd size tank there that allows us to blend. So that is the small little bright tank back there, and these are all for carbonation. That tank will allow us to blend two smaller tanks together. And when we blend two smaller tanks, it allows us to have one more level of complexity where we can catch two different yeast strains and two different flavor profiles. We can also blend multiple of our larger tanks, or smaller tanks up there into a larger tank. So the big difference between these tanks and the ones up top, I showed you the dimples, if anyone's listening really carefully. The dimples on the tanks up there, the glycol moves between them, but because they're two very thin sheets of metal, it is not very insulated. These are very insulated. So there are two sheets of metal, and then there is glycol line inside. So we can keep these much colder and they pull off the pressure. And what we are doing is sending cider through a carbonation stone. And I like to describe it as kind of like a pumice stone or something like that, where it's got lots of small holes. We blow CO2 through, it explodes in microscopic bubbles, and it circulates that, and those dissolve. That's where the bubbles in your cider are coming from. There is naturally occurring CO2 in fermentation. Some of that is captured, some of it is blown off. But at the end, we dial in CO2 to exactly the right amount to keep your can solid, to keep the product fresh. CO2 is a very important part of what we do. So what we do is we come down here from the tanks up top, where we do our fermentation, and where the yeast is converting the sugars, creating alcohol, and then it comes down, and I'm going to show you the filtration. So that's the middle step here. So this is one of the not so well kept secrets to why our cider, we can do some things with our cider and make it shelf stable, but also very flavorful. So this is cross flow filtration. A lot of people would think that this is reverse osmosis filtration. There's some similar concepts, but it is different. Most of the commercial wineries in the country move towards this kind of filtration instead of the traditional filtration where you're pushing with pressure and pushing your wine or cider basically through cardboard plates to strip out the yeast. So we are getting the yeast out. It's why the cider can be as clear as the cider you're hopefully drinking right now is. And it isn't going to be cloudy or thick like a lot of beers are. So what happens is the cider comes down and it runs through, and there are these little, they basically look like straws or hoses, and they have microscopic holes in them. And the cider comes up through it, and the solids can't fall out because the solids are larger than the holes. We're taking bacteria out, we're taking yeast out, we're taking solids like peels or something if they get through to this point. The liquid falls out of the straws and goes back down and gets pumped out, and it's clean, it's sterile, whereas the solids keep getting pushed, and they get pushed into a concentration tank, and we filter that again and again and again until we basically have the solids pulled out and the cider in the tanks. This is an extraordinarily gentle way of filtering. It's a fairly automated one. I mean, my guys do spend the majority of their time running filtration because it's such a big piece, but we're able to filter a lot with a rather small team. So this is a really cool piece. It doesn't look super exciting maybe in this context, but it is really neat to see the cider pushing through and the solids falling out. So it's currently sitting here like with a soaking clean cleaning cycle. So we're going to actually have the camera pivot over here. And I'm gonna stand over here if you don't mind. I want you to look at me. Sorry, I haven't done this before. So one of the cool features, so for anyone who's interested in architecture, I've been geeking out about science for a little bit and about alcohol, but one of the cool features of this building is that we have the brick and cinder block going back and forth. And most people look at this and they say, oh, that's so it expands, tracks the wall, crack, gives it more rigidity, something like that. The actual reason why they did this is all the buildings in the neighborhood have brick on the outside. Nowadays, you'll see them basically gluing the facade of brick up to the outside of a fancy effect or something like that. But they're coming in and they're usually pre-laid in sheets, and they're kind of stuck up there. And it's just different the way they anchor it in. Here, and all the contractors that are watching are just hating this description. But basically, when we walk to the outside of the building, you'll see that there's also bricks that are on end. And the bricks can be screwed into the bricks, but if they're screwed into the cinder block will crumble. So these lines of bricks actually are what holds the bricks on the outside of the building and locks them together. So I'll show that from the outside. The other small, cool little feature, and pretty much everyone in our neighborhood has this, but these are cinder blocks that are pretty unique to Richmond. They're being made in Richmond, and this is called Richmond red brick. So these are very very common, but important and somewhat difficult to replace bricks, which Hampden-Sydney obviously has a lot of a history with bricks from coming from all over the world, and sometimes being reused when buildings are knocked down and things like that. So you could buy more bricks like this, but they were made in Richmond and they were in some of the cinder blocks. So they're fairly unique, and it's kind of a unique hue. I don't know how well you can see it right now. So we're going to walk up and talk a little bit more about the building. I think we are about halfway through right now. So we'll be doing some drinking. I hope you guys are already drinking. I am. So careful yourself. So this is where you start to see our world look very different. This is usually a beautiful open event room with a bar over here, and very little stored back here. And as you can see, we have products stored everywhere. We have empty kegs because bars aren't buying them, so we're not filling them. We have cans that are being pulled for our deliveries. While these are selling quickly, it still takes up a lot of space. Normally, this is an event space. This is where we have to gather on weekends. We have roughly 80,000 people every year to enjoy our retail experience. That is not happening right now. So this room is rather full, but it's a good example of some of the beauty of the building. So we can look up, and I will stand close so you can hear me, but you see that we have really beautiful wood ceilings and the metal runners. So again, architecturally, it's a really cool building, very common in our neighborhood, but this is not something you see everywhere. Building was built anticipating possibly having a second floor. Second, it was also, this building was built to last. This building was built to hold weight. These rafters, while not designed to do it, are capable of lifting one of our tanks off the ground with a hoist. This building is excessively well built out. So you can see it's not a huge building, but we do have some space back here. Normally this would be a hybrid event space and production space. If we turn over here, you can see the back of the tanks, which the lighting is nice, so you can see how our layout looks here. So again, we have our small tanks and we have the 15 barrels, a cool little piece with these ones that look like spaceships here. Those tanks were actually the original brewing tanks at Legend Brewery and have been repurposed. So those were my first tanks that I bought because they were going up to bigger tanks. So we've repurposed a lot of the equipment and pieces in here. Similarly, we built this, we bought this refrigerator used, and there's kind of a funny story, but perfect, I will open it. So we're storing some things in here that would normally be in the refrigerator, but still fairly full. Normally, everything down the middle aisle would move every week, and things on the side would be stored a little longer. So right now we're storing lots of different things in here, and there's lots of cider. But it's a pretty big refrigerator. It was bigger than the apartment I lived in when I bought the refrigerator. And the funny little story about this refrigerator, hopefully people enjoy these anecdotes, but the refrigerator, someone reached out and said, hey, this winery in Baltimore, or this wine warehouse is closing, this refrigerator is available. I was like, oh, that's great. That's great. How much is it? It's $4,000. Wow, that's an $80,000 refrigerator. It's fairly new. And I was like, I don't know what the catch is, but it's worth driving up there. So we drove up, and I rented a truck on the way up there, and we went up there and had to load this thing in the truck. But basically, he was like, yeah, $4,000 cash. If you can get out of the building today, it's yours. It runs fine. It's like I just basically buying a ticket to like, the Caribbean or something like that. He's out. He's going to like pilot a boat or something like that. So we, on the drive back, I was like, holy crap, I don't know where I'm going to put this refrigerator. This is a really big refrigerator. It's 15 by 50. And I was like, I don't have a place to put this. And I am in the truck now. And I bought it. $4,000 steel for it. It works really well. So I called a couple of Hampden-Sydney guys. Hey, anybody knows that's warehouse space, something like that? And a guy got back to me and said, yeah, my boss has a weird little building in his parking lot of his commercial paint company. He'd be happy to like store it in there. And I think he was accepting a favor. So I go in there, like, this is a weird, creepy building. But his business is gorgeous. And there's a strange little squat building, like 8-foot ceilings, it's all cinder block. And there's some like refrigerators that are locked down. Tell me something out of what the Walking Dead. I was like, what's the history of this building? He's like, oh, well, it was a church in the middle of our parking lot, which was fine. They were there on Sundays and then they were gone. And then we came back and this was perfect. The church, went out of business, whatever church does, closes up shop. But then it became a strip club and became a real nuisance. The strip club was having 8-foot ceilings, and this is why they never opened refrigerators. So they didn't know if they were going to find them. But it goes out of business, so they bought it, so they wouldn't have another neighbor in the middle of the parking lot. They're a very professional business. So his friends stored those equipment and stuff, and I was the only guy storing 15 by 50 refrigerator. That was bigger than the place I lived in. And then I realized how big this refrigerator is, and I have to find a building that can fit this refrigerator in its current configuration. So a lot of opening Buskey was hustling, buying weird, crappy used equipment, and sometimes it was brilliant used equipment, finding a place for it. But a variety of sitting myself down. I now distributor, formerly Loveland, now Premium, was owned by the Stepanian family, which is probably a lot of people know. And I called Mark up when he needed a place to store these tanks I bought from Legend. And there's a bit of a theme here of me buying stuff and figuring out where I was going to put it. But they gave me a great deal on the tanks from Legend. I called Mark and I was like, hey, you got a huge parking lot for your distributor. Any chance I can store them there? And he was like, well, they're going to have to be outside. And I'm like, these tanks are totally weatherproof. They're stainless steel. So we ended up storing them in his parking lot for a couple of years. So got a lot of really interesting little favors from the Hampden-Sydney network that I'm very grateful for. And it comes full circle, and it's fun to get to give back to the Hampden-Sydney guys. We're going to walk out briefly, look at the outside of the building, and then probably to the front of the building as well. We're going to get pretty close to see this, but I was talking about the ends of the bricks and the long bricks. So for anyone who's interested in the architecture, these bricks butt up against the strips of brick, and that's how the facade is locked on. Second piece down here. This alley's not really used for anything. It's kind of a dead space, but you can see the old railroad track here. So we have the old railroad track that would have been loaded in from, you can see this glass window here. That used to be a loading door for the building next door. It's at the same height. And then our space is covered here, but also the door we walked out of. So there were 4 doors, all of which loaded into a train. So they would load into the train, into a private train car, and they would push it down to what is now a theater down there. That's an old depot. So they would load down to there and connect it to a train, go anywhere for them. And, during World War I, roughly when this building was built, it was obviously a time where really turning localized distribution to mass distribution and international worldwide distribution became so important. So this was a really major location for the region to bring products into, to get them out to where to go to Norfolk, to overseas, or to get to other railroads around the country. Richmond has a lot of history, railroads and canals. So there's probably a lot of going. But we're going to walk around to the front of the building. Hopefully, I don't get arrested with a fine. But so we're going to walk to the front of the building. And obviously, a big part of what we do here is the customer-facing aspect. So with it being customer-facing, the curb appeal is important. We don't have people coming right now, but I still think it's a pretty beautiful building. We can start to crowd. We're trying to keep up with it. But this is actually our orchard in the front of the building here. So these are apples. And then a joke that the classics majors will enjoy is I had to pick which 2 apple trees we're going to grow. We grew Rome and Empire apples. I thought the Roman Empire was a funny joke. For the classics nerds, I almost had a minor in mind. Got very close. Did a lot of Latin. We had apple trees in the front here. And then if we want to look at it from the street, we'll make sure we don't get hit by a car. But you can see we've got a pretty cool building. This building was in terrible shape when we found it, but it's a pretty world-class artist, Ross Trimmer, painting on the outside of the building and restore it. But now we'll have the experience of walking into the taste room, which again looks really different. It's not a public space right now, except for cans. So we'll come in the front door. So look forward to having you guys in like this. But this is our tasting room. So this was an office section with plaster drop ceilings and sewage floating out of under a bathroom when we found it. Now we have all slate tabletops, pool table slates, and you can see the corners cut, some of the neat pieces. So like these are the corners of the pool tables. That's something we restored. We took down the drop ceilings, and now you have a really interesting view into the history of the building. Over here on the walls, you can see some of this art over here. So again, it comes back to the theme of always trying to reclaim everything. So these are old skateboard pieces, and I just met a really cool guy at a happy hour. I was admiring his art. He's like, "Want me to make you some?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." So they're cut up skateboard art and rich art of boards. If you're interested in doing some skateboard art, it's pretty cool stuff. More art from the guy who did the front of the building. And so this is the bar. We've got our copper and our slate. Ryan Grunts, who is Ryan Bar, is going to walk you through how we fill a crowler. A crowler is a 32-ounce can that you can take to go off the tap, but it is very similar to how a 12-ounce can or 16-ounce can would be filled with a canning line, except that is automatically filled and on a conveyor belt and moving it 100 times as fast. So we're going to try to get a good angle on this, and Ryan's going to walk you through it.
All right. So first thing we do, we always label our cans, just because you got to know what's inside before it leaves the building. So I'm going to be filling a crowler of our peach tea cider. First thing we're going to do is hit it with some CO2. That's going to push some of the air out of the can, create a nice cloud of carbon dioxide. It's going to help preserve the flavor and the carbonation of the cider once we seal it up. And then I'm going to fill it up like you would any pint. We're going to fill it up all the way up to the top. Place the lid on top of the foam, push the foam out so that we ensure that there's no air left over in the package. And see right here. We're just getting up to the top now. Oh, and of course, I was going to say, I can just do a little blend with the blueberry pancake here.
And that's how cider's made. That's that. So that very unfortunate blend is going to go home with the videographer. Thanks, Ryan. You're welcome. So again, we have our front space. We've got side rooms, again, full pool table slate, just kind of like pieces. We'll walk back to where production was. So we're very close to the front of the tank, so you're going to get a context of how close we really are when we're in here drinking. So we're back full circle. This is our little world, our little empire. It's not huge, but we pack a lot of stuff in and have a lot of fun with it. A lot of creative stuff happens here, and a lot of great memories with you guys and other people. So I'm gonna talk through some of the ciders that you might have right now, and just at very high levels so you don't get bored. But some of the things I talked about, like we use Virginia apples. This is one of the simplest ciders in the world. It is Virginia apples from Nelson County on our orchards. Fermented dry and back to with the same apple juice from the same trees, and we filter it and we add bubbles to it. Like I said, the CO2, and it's tart, it's natural, it's not concentrate. We don't add sugars to our ciders. People have this perception the cider is extremely sweet, and also that it's like very cloying and sticks to your palates. And you guys are drinking this right now. There is a little bit of sweetness left, but it's a lot less than most commercial ciders, and with no corn syrup or sugar. Hopefully, it's very clean. Hopefully, the acid in the apple is kind of pulled the fruit. Hopefully, you enjoy it. It's intended to be very drinkable. One of the things I said when I looked at a lot of fruit cideries, or the really mass-produced cideries, I don't want something that's just like tastes like I'm drinking a soft drink, but I also don't want a $40 wine bottle that has a lot of like eliteness behind it. It's very stuffy, but I want to make a really world-class product. It's very simple. And I was like, I need to make something that I could drink a six-pack of on the river. So made this. And it's designed for rapids in Richmond, which we have the only class 4 rapids in downtown America. So when you come visit Richmond, do that as well. We have the Buskey dry here, and that is completely dry. It's gonna be a little bit funkier. We use beer yeast strain, but it's still great. Videographer's drinking it looks pretty happy. And yeah, so it's a great cider. It's very drinkable. There's not a lot of approachable 12-ounce completely dry ciders in the country. Most people find that The RBA is close to dry enough, but completely dry is a really cool thing to get to try, and it does very well for us. Our standard go-to fruited cider is our Tart cherry cider. It's made with 100% Montmorency cherries, so you're going to get like quite a bit of like fruitiness and a round palate. It's very drinkable, but then a bit of a pop of acidity. It's mouth puckering and really delicious. And this one has been just a mainstay for us. We've got a couple farmers we love working with that did Montmorency cherries, and obviously the base is still apples. Watermelon rosemary that just came out is our most popular seasonal every year. So this is, we add watermelons and we add rosemary. So a lot of our ciders are extremely simple. Like it is apples from our orchard, and it's called watermelon rosemary, and we add watermelons, we add rosemary, and anyone wants to copy us, they can try. It's very simple, but we have a lot of fun with some of our products being extremely simple, where we get to just put really high quality fruit in front of you. This is one of our sweetest ciders. It's also one of our most popular. Another interesting one we have on here, some of you guys might have grabbed, because you like light beers, and this is a light cider. It's sort of our take on like a hard seltzer, but it's still using like whole fresh ingredients. So it is 100 calories, 0 carb. It's called Mojito Light, but it's not sweet like you'd think with a mojito. So just a light mint and a light lime zest added to a fresh, low alcohol content cider. So for me, this is like my lawn mowing cider on a hot day. If we're doing work, but being kind of casual, I think it's a good choice. Some other ones you might have, they've already run out. The habanero mango has quite a bit of kick, quite a bit of heat. That's like a nice juicy ingredients. Ran out in 4 days. The jalapeno lime is one of our standards. I was sitting at a taco shop near here one day, and I was drinking an RBA cider, and I was like, I wonder if this would be good with jalapenos in it. So I dropped the jalapeno in it, maybe a little something else, and I squirted some lime in, and we walked right over and started making it, and it's been one of our most popular ciders. Other ciders, peach tea cider, which is actually what I'm drinking right now, hands are out, but my wife has a little tea shop she likes across town, and she came in and said, I'd really like to use this awesome peach tea cider to... Sorry, you can't hear us. We've got an air compressor going on in the back. It's a constant work cycle here, and things have to be run. So basically, my wife came in and was like, I love this peach tea it just like the leaves and peach blossoms and all from Perrytown Teas. She's like, could we make a cider out of it? Of course we could. So we go over there and I say, hey, can I have 15 pounds of this tea? It seems like a good amount. I'm thinking in terms of like we buy lots of pounds of lots of things, but for a tiny little tea shop, you might buy like 3 or 4 ounces. Substantial order. So they scrambled over a couple days and made it for us. And then the next year we needed 10 times as much, roughly 10 times as much, or 5 times as much again. This time it was actually like 3 months of production for them. So the peach tea cider, it's beautiful. It's a fun one. We barrel age a bunch of stuff. The barrels are not very viewable right now because they're hidden behind a bunch of stuff that shouldn't be in our building. But we have sherry barrels going. We have Maker's Mark barrels going, which I know a lot of you guys like. We have brandy barrels, tequila barrels, rum barrels, and we take our ciders and add them to these barrels, age them. Some of them we add. If you're lucky enough to have an old-fashioned cider right now, we added cherries and we added orange zest, like an old-fashioned cocktail. Very boozy, very delicious, very drinkable. So we're doing a lot of things to really push the limits with our creative ciders, but also some classics. You might have the heritage cider. Basics with the heritage cider is 3 apples that our founding fathers would have been growing, that were grown specifically for cider production. They're very acidic, they're very tannic. That cider is fermented almost completely dry, and then back to the same juice again. You won't get many heritage style ciders that have any sweetness, because they're very expensive apples, so people generally want them to be very fancy and very eyebrow and very beautiful. Like, I think very highly of the ciders. Us taking a more casual and approachable take on these beautiful historic apples, I think, is somewhat fitting again with the Hampden-Sydney thing of doing, taking history, but also like keeping it fresh, keeping it modern. And we've had a lot of success. That was Kevin. He's getting back from delivering cider, so he might have just delivered to some of you guys during this talk, but he's been working really hard doing thousands of deliveries across the state with a few other people on our team. So the range of ciders. If anyone has specific questions, I think we're starting to run low on time, so maybe we should go ahead and take a few questions. If there are any, do we know if there are any questions? Do you want to do it out here, or do you want to go back inside? We'll go back inside and we'll answer whatever questions you have. questions. I think Cameron's going to read them, and I'm going to try to answer them.
Yeah, Will, can you hear me okay? Can you hear me on the?
But a little bit.
Well, I don't think you can see me, but I've got my hat, and I've also got a fresh cracked can of Buskey, so I'm in full spirit. Thank you so much for that awesome tour and all that information. It was so informative. We loved hearing the story about all your HSC connections and the impact of the Hampden-Sydney network during the growth of your business. And your facility is so unique. Everything has character. Everything has a story, which I think is so cool. And we do have a couple questions that have come in. One is from Andrew King, who's our director of the Entrepreneurship Center on campus. And he was wondering, when you're looking at key attributes of growing your company right now, what sort of areas are you looking at? Is it branding, flavor diversity, volume,
Sure.
price? What are you really focused on right now to grow Buskey?
Sure. Yeah, so I put up a blog post. I'm not trying to push my blog. I'm embarrassed by it. But I put up a blog post earlier talking about how, like, we haven't just sat back and, like, tried to clear old stock and liquidate it. And just tread water. We've really been pushing forward. So while this has been a really hard time, immediately we recognize there are going to be opportunities. One of the opportunities I talked about is getting turn over these small tanks more often. A higher percentage of our production capacity, instead of going to the same awesome ciders that are not as exciting, they go into distribution, because you usually see one or two at Food Line, or Total Wine might have 3. We've gotten to bring all of the ciders equally to customers. So we've gotten to be very creative, spend more time on the creative batches. Second, even though we've been socially distant, our team has had even more purpose than usual. I mean, because normally there's a little bit more of like we come in, we make the cider, we send the emails, we go home, the tasting room staff pours you a pint, they're wonderful, but there's less crossover, where the team really is a very cohesive team that is dealing with huge issues every day, huge struggles, and coming up with really unique solutions that are, socially responsible. And ultimately, we've actually done reasonably well revenue-wise. The third place where I would say we've made progress during this is essentially, while we've lost our main 2 departments, being the tasting room and the the distribution of kegs, we've also picked up a new department we never had, which is like me physically delivering cider to a person in Roanoke from Hampden-Sydney, or going to Falls Church and dropping off product and having that conversation at someone's door. So we have a new arm of our company that we expect to maintain. We've learned a lot about our customers. We have more information from them than we're used to having, more of a feedback cycle, mostly very positive, like, oh, you do like this. Oh, you like this way. Oh, you want more of that. And, the occasional, like, oh, it is not as obvious as we think it is that this, like, weird thing is cool, or it is not as simple as we thought it was. But getting that feedback. So we have managed to really drive through this. And now we have cell-phone numbers for customers in the state. We've experienced environments we hadn't seen before. We've gotten support nonprofits that we get to take the time to, and really stripping the business down to its studs. While it really does look pretty crowded in here, ratty, we've also stripped the business down to its studs, and hey, the studs are really good, and been able to leap from that point. So it's been an exciting, exhausting period. But I think that the fact that we were able to move forward during this says a lot about how well we're going to do during the next stages, whatever they throw at us. That's a good question.
Another question for the students who we have on, because we do have a number of students who got on who have an interest in maybe going into the food and bev space, which is not an easy space to compete in, obviously. What sort of challenges do you think students who are trying to get into the food and bev space will face when they're trying to start their own ventures?
So students trying to get into food and beverage, what challenges will they face?
Okay, sure. So students that are looking to get into the food and beverage business, it is hard. I mean, I thought I was very well prepared. I had a nice head start with winning with a world-class education and having some access to capital that I had raised and winning a startup competition. It still took me over 3 years to get open, and it's a long time. I mean, it's a long time, and not everyone who wants to open something recognizes that it could take that long, and that 4 years in, we really could be failing right now during COVID. Like, the rug can just get pulled out of under you, and if you have a restaurant right now, that's a very tough space to be in. But what I would say is that anyone who wants to personally have a conversation, I'll give you a better, more personalized answer. But Hampden-Sydney Network really will give you some of those opportunities. Like I said, of like people having storage that don't make sense, like a strip club church that beverages in the parking lot of their building, and good advice and professors that will help you like-minded after I graduated. Also, just like the breadth of knowledge that we've developed at Hampden-Sydney and the unique experience can lend itself very well to entrepreneurship. And access to capital. I mean, I actually didn't have any Hampden-Sydney investors, but there certainly is always that opportunity. I had a lot more mentors and advisors than actual capital investors, but there certainly is that element that can be valuable. So I mean, it's a tough space right now. I mean, it's a space that's ripe for it wants to be disrupted right now. I mean, the traditional restaurant model is hurting, and a lot of people are losing their life savings, and people have lost their jobs. People aren't eating any less, they're eating more. People aren't drinking any less, they're drinking more. They're just drinking very differently, they're eating very differently. This is a great time to be an entrepreneur if you're trying to revolutionize the industry. If you're a guy who's saying we should buy a bar, you're wrong. You shouldn't buy a bar, probably, or I'm wrong, and that's why you'll be a great entrepreneur. But it's a strange time in the industry. People are eating ghost kitchens are a cool thing to look up. Ghost kitchens, food delivery that's a little more ethical than like Grubhub or Uber Eats. They're going to have a huge backlash for shady business practices. Someone who learns how to serve these industries that need to be served right now would do very well. A lot of our vendors that are, like our mobile canner is a great example. I always tell people that want to open a brewery, don't open a brewery, open a business that serves breweries. And our mobile canner makes great money during this time because everyone's drinking cans and not everyone has a canning line. So they're coming in and they're working like crazy, making really good money and keeping us all afloat. So I mean, they're a good company. They're a good company providing a valuable service. So I would look at the industry you're trying to get into and say, do I actually want to be in that industry? Or would I rather find a pain point in that industry and try to solve it, which is a key tenet of entrepreneurship. And if anyone wants my email, Cameron can give it to you.
Will, just time for probably one or two more questions here, but how did you come up with the name Buskey?
Yeah, the name Buskey is a fun one. So we had the lamest name ever, Old Virginia Cider LLC. If you're ever lucky enough to get a small check from us, like Hampden-Sydney is going to. Old Virginia Cider was a holding place. When I realized I might win the startup competition I was in, I had to come up with the name on the spot. Old Virginia Cider, it even has an E at the end of old, which is super lame. But my lawyer looks at me and he's like, this is a terrible name. It's not trademarkable. It's too like location focused. It's not unique. Other people have the name essentially. And he's like, and I know you're a stickler on like billable hours, so off the clock is your friend. It's a terrible name. I was devastated. We had 100 followers on Facebook. So I went and locked myself. I was in Williamsburg at the time. I went into the library and I pulled every textbook and every document I could find on alcohol and from the colonies, because I wanted to reference the historic nature of cider, which I haven't mentioned. Cider was the most popular beverage during colonial times. I wanted to reference that. I found this old letter from crotchety old Ben Franklin, and he was like, here's all the shit that young people are saying in taverns, and it's not from Old English or French, they're just American drinking words. And he was complaining about it. He was being bitter that the hipsters were talking this way. And I'm going down the list, and there's, he kicked the bucket, he chased the mule, he lost his horse, he chased Aunt Sally, Buskey. Man, that's a cool word. And I looked it up, and really no one was using it. So I wanted to reference the history of cider. And then one of the things I wanted to reference, so cider was the most popular beverage during colonial times. I'm going to talk about the logo a little now because I think that's probably a follow-up question. So the logo, I wanted to reference the colonial period with the name. And then during Prohibition, the feds came and cut down most of the apple trees that were for cider growing, for cider making, because they really are very tart and acidic and not great for eating. And it's very easy to incognito make cider in your dorm room or fraternity house. You're like, oh, the apple juice went bad. I didn't know. Unless you have an honor code, of course. So during Prohibition, the American cider tradition got wiped out. The German brewers came back faster than the cider makers, and we haven't really had cider in substantial quantities until very recently. So I wanted to reference the Prohibition period with the kind of Prohibition era guy. And then what I wanted to do is say, like, hey, we're going to take ourselves very seriously, but we're never going to take ourselves too seriously. So there's some cideries out there that are wonderful. They make amazing cider, but they take themselves so seriously, and it's not a ton of fun. And I wanted to be a lot of fun. So I was like, hey, let's make really serious cider, but let's never take ourselves too seriously. So we put the silly hat on top of Buskey. And the idea with that was that Ben Franklin was a great American and a great imbiber then. He would be now, but he'd wear a different hat. And so that's kind of the whole brand. And I think that's something that kind of speaks to us as Hampden-Sydney guys who had the privilege and the misfortune of living in Cushing, where it's one of the oldest dorms in the country, but not one of the most comfortable. And that there's an interesting balance on campus of just like old buildings and like new concepts and new thoughts. And, yeah, so I mean, I was coming out of Hampden-Sydney right for the like the nerd factor of this old word, and also for kind of the legacy of it and bringing something back. So it fit me very well.
That's very cool, Will. That's awesome. I'm gonna say one more question, just so you can get back to drinking cider and whatever else you have going on. You've given us a bunch of time tonight. But what are some of the ways that people can get connected with Buskey and interact with Buskey, do business with Buskey once we get back to normal and things are open back up?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, right now is obviously a very different time. So a lot of our business right now is people telling their friends that we deliver, that we sell online, stuff like that. Ultimately, we're looking forward to getting past this period, back to the normal business, which is if you own a bar or you hang out at a bar and know the person who makes decisions. Basically, across the entire state, our cider is available through all the Miller House distributors. So that's Premium here in Richmond, and Premium up in Northern Virginia, and Chesbay and Hampton Roads, and out west it's Blue Ridge Beverage. We do have one Bud House distributor on the Eastern Shore, Wendell, and they do a wonderful job. So any bar, restaurant, grocery store, bottle shop can buy Buskey anytime. Maybe not all the variety we're selling online, but they can buy a good selection of our ciders. So we always appreciate that kind of support. You can pass that on. Our tasting room will be back open. I look forward to having some of you guys hanging out. We also have a tasting room on the Eastern Shore. Tasting room is a huge part of our business. We look forward to having it open again. As far as doing business with us, I had a couple of you guys reach out already wanting to help us streamline some parts of our business, which is cool. At the moment, extremely hectic, trying to reinvent our business every day. Once business gets back to normal again, I'm looking forward to talking to some of y'all about insurance, finance, banking, packaging supplies, and things like that. And certainly enjoy those conversations and look forward to them. At the moment, the 16-hour days every day for the last 2.5 months, there's not a whole lot of time. Can't be in person, and this is not a great meeting. Talking to a camera instead of talking to people. But we're looking forward to being able to do it in person. I'm happy for the school to pass my information on to like have a conversation. I'd be thrilled to talk to students who don't have a business interest, but we just like to talk. A lot of people mentored me, and what little wisdom I have, I'd be happy to share, especially if they're willing and able to come to Richmond at some point. Which one want to have a pint or a coffee if they're not. But yeah, I mean, I was given a lot of free advice, and mine's free as well, regardless of how much it's worth. So. Certainly look forward to meeting more of you guys. Cheers to all of you guys I already do know. I think my mom logged in, so cheers to you as well. Yeah, if there are any more questions, or do we need to call it quits?
Will, thank you so much. I'm going to wrap up just by saying you're such an exemplary alumnus. You embody all that makes Hampden-Sydney great. You give back to the alma mater through philanthropic support with your time, doing things like this. You're offered to mentor students. I know Dr. Andrew King and others who are on this event tonight will definitely take you up on that and spread the word. We all love to support you. We love your cider. I know you definitely turned me into a believer with hard cider several years ago. So thanks for all you do for Hampden-Sydney. Thanks for being such a great model alumnus and spreading the good word about all that Hampden-Sydney has to offer. We wish you nothing but continued success in all of your future endeavors. And thanks for what you're doing in the community in Richmond to keep people afloat and give back whenever you can. We just can't thank you enough, man. All good things. And this event tonight was a really great time. So thank you for this unique opportunity. And I hope everybody has a great night. Go Tigers and cheers.
Cheers, y'all. Thanks for the support. Appreciate y'all.
Take care.